Street Fighter 2. Wow. I can't imagine how much money, or should I say, my mom's money, that I put in that machine. I mean, seriously, we probably could have bought the whole arcade unit with as many quarters as I put in that game. Mortal Kombat as well. Growing up with arcades was really great. Now, when I was growing up in Tucson, Arizona, our place was called Golf and Stuff. Now, when you were living in Tucson, you knew what Golf and Stuff was as a kid because that place was our place. It was miniature golf, batting cages, bumper boats and bumper cars, and the arcade. And the arcade always had the newest games. It always had Mortal Kombat, MK2, MK3, Street Fighter, Super Street Fighter 2, NBA Jam Tournament Edition. It had all the newest games always. Even like when War Gods came out, and that kind of looked cool, but then it turned out to be a really crappy game. Killer Instinct 2. I mean, it had the newest games at all times, and that was the place to go to always try the newest arcade games. Right at the entrance, I remember when MK2 first came out, crowd of kids around that machine. Quarters lined up, to take your spot. One person loses, the next one's up. Put the quarters in. It was a big deal for us back then. And also, I think we had a really great arcade at the mall, too. And that arcade had multiplayer games, X-Men, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I mean, those were the games to play. I mean, those were the days. Now, the game I played the most in the early 90s was Street Fighter 2. And my player of choice was Blanca at first. Because I was pretty good at the game until I got to Ken. And then I got my ass handed to me. Always. I could never beat Ken. I don't know. With the quarters I put in, every time I got to Ken, I would always lose. So, then I started using Ken, because I figured, hey, if Ken keeps kicking my ass, I'm just going to beat Ken too. And actually, I got really good at him, and I would progress farther. So, ever since then, I use Ken. And I know everyone's really big with the Guile theme, and when people hear Guile's theme, that's Street Fighter for them. Well, when I hear Ken's theme, that's Street Fighter for me. Now, when Mortal Kombat first came out, I didn't really get into it as quickly as others did. Because Street Fighter, to me, was a lot quicker and faster and more colorful and vivid. And the thing that attracted me to Mortal Kombat, I think like everybody else, was the violence. Now, I was a Sub-Zero guy. And, of course, I really got in the habit of freeze, uppercut, slide. I mean, that was pretty much the typical moves in Mortal Kombat for me and Sub-Zero. And the great thing about Sub-Zero and me back then was that I knew his fatality, and it was always a joy to have friends or even strangers see me pull it off. Just Sub-Zero ripping someone's head off and the spine just hanging there and blood flowing. Very satisfying. And people would always ask, how do you do that? How do you do that? And the reason why I knew how to do those moves, just like how I knew how to pull off combos in Street Fighter 2, or actually it was Super Street Fighter 2 back then, is because I had the strategy guides. Now, in my whole gaming life, I've only purchased 3 strategy guides, ever. Mortal Kombat 1, Super Street Fighter 2, and Killer Instinct 2. Why? Because these strategy guides told all the combos, gave away all the secrets, told how to do all the fatalities, the finishing moves, everything. And back then, there was no internet. So that's the difference between today and in the past, that secrets in video games don't mean anything anymore because you can just look them up online. But back then, secrets were a big deal because only the video game magazines sometimes published them, and the strategy guides. And if you didn't have those, you didn't know the secrets. So it was a cool thing to have, to know that there were secrets in Mortal Kombat that other people didn't know. For example, take this Christmas card that I saved for my best friend back in 3rd grade or 4th grade, and this was when Mortal Kombat was new to us. I mean, just look what he wrote. So, if you don't believe me, ask Mike. I beat Mortal Kombat with Scorpion, and he doesn't say, come over here. He says, get over here. That's because I always said, Scorpion said, come over here. And this is what we got in arguments on the playground about. I mean, kid stuff, right? And who is Lizard? Lizard, he means reptile, because nobody knew about Reptile. Reptile was like the secret character that some people accidentally found, and people didn't know him as Reptile. They said, oh, he's Lizard or Reptile, or they didn't really know. It was a big secret, and yeah, so he's asking me, who's Lizard, which means reptile, and it's really Shang Tsung. He's what he's saying. He's trying to pronounce Shang Tsung because we didn't really know how to say his name back then because the game never really said Shang Tsung's name. I don't think we remember learning his name until the movie came out. But yep. And of course, may the miracles of Christmas fill your heart with joy and peace. Yo hoi, Mark. Yo hoi. Yeah, that's from Street Fighter 2. That's E Honda, right? Yo hoi. Basically, Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2 consumed. Basically, Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2 consumed my childhood. Literally. I mean, when they hit the 16-bit market, it was all over. I remember first seeing the Super Nintendo at EB Games. I think that was EB Games. I don't even know if that exists anymore. I think GameStop purchased that. But Super Mario World was so amazing and had vivid colors, and I just couldn't believe how awesome the graphics were. But I didn't really get to first play it until I played it at my friend's house. There was one day that he invited me and all our friends over to his house, and he had Super Nintendo, and we all didn't at the time. And we were playing Super Mario World and Street Fighter 2 and the Super Scope. And those were good times. Now, my best friend at the time, Mark, who gave me the Christmas card, had a Genesis. And when I was at his house, we would play Street Fighter 2, of course. Now, this was the only time I ever played the Sega Genesis. Because back then, I was anti-Sega. I mean, really anti-Sega. Now, I don't have many personal stories with the Super Nintendo because I actually got it late in its life cycle. I got it around 94 or 95. And what happened was one of our friends kind of messed everything up. He messed up our fanboy fun, so to say. He messed up me making fun of the Sonic fanboys and the Sonic fanboys making fun of me, and we were just all having fun. Because, we knew deep down it really didn't matter, but it was just something to talk about, something we all talked about. But he messed it all up. Totally. Because he bought something new. And now he was the cool kid on the block. I mean, it didn't matter about me saying how awesome Super Nintendo was because it had Donkey Kong Country, and Donkey Kong Country's graphics were pretty much 32-bit or 32 meg or whatever the magazines were spouting back then. And, the Sega fanboys couldn't, brag about Vector Man and say, oh, it looks just as good as Donkey Kong Country when it didn't. But, they couldn't say anything anymore because it didn't matter. And it just messed everything up because our friend bought a Sony PlayStation. And we were like, wow, you got a PlayStation? And you know what I said? The first thing I said when he mentioned he got a Sony PlayStation? Well, that's cool, but I think I'm going to wait for the Nintendo Ultra 64.